Hey, everybody. Welcome to Fundraising AI Live. I'm your designated liver, Tim Lockey, and I'm joined by Nathan Chappelle, the man who really was championing AI before AI was cool, back when everybody thought it was blockchain and all of that. So, Nathan, it's great to see you again. I always love it when we can
Yeah.
chat.
Yeah, good to see you too. I actually was really hoping you were going to start out by saying, "This is Tim Lockey with some smooth jazz." And then, like, because you've got the voice, you got the vibe, you got the neon light right behind you. That's like, I mean, ready to go. I think, like, maybe after the Fundraising AI Summit, you just go straight into like some like smooth jazz kind of and calm everybody down from all the AI hype.
All right, I like that. The jazz is smooth. Let's just say it that way.
We
Anyway.
need it. We need it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's funny that you raised that. I was just thinking about year one, after the, you know, after Mallory came back from maternity leave and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
No, it was during I remember it was during the conference. We had this one speaker in there who was unlike everybody else. It was like the first day lunch speaker, and she had this very monotone approach, highly scripted, clearly reading just from a script. And I sent something to Mallory that said, "How is how am I enthralled by the speaker? She's breaking every single speaking rule that there is." And Mallory said, "I knew that people would need a nervous system break on day one, and so I invited her for that." And it was, I mean, that's when I realized that
That your
Mallory's just
brain
like,
needed
like,
yeah, she's
yeah,
smart.
how
Um,
in the world? Anyway, yeah,
yeah, you needed
we will
someone.
need that.
Well, there's someone for everyone,
Yeah, right.
right. I always tell people, like, if you like what I said, follow me, because I tend to, push out an article a week or two. And if you don't like it, absolutely don't follow me, because you're going to be super annoyed. So find the person and the style that fits you. But I do agree, like, sometimes it's just nice to, like, let's take it down a notch. I
Yeah,
try to
right.
balance the optimism with pessimism as well as possible, with staying about 1% above on the optimistic side. So don't always succeed with that.
I think that is, I think that that makes sense. That is my experience of you, that you do a good job of balancing, both of those.
It's
So,
hard. I wrote a book called The Generosity Crisis, so that tipped me in favor on the opposite side a little bit. But I've had to spend the last couple of years redeeming myself from that.
but it is a hopeful book.
It is.
And I think like that I feel like, I don't know if you know the character Puddleglum, who is a very minor character in the Chronicles of Narnia books, but this is a character who is very aware of all the problems and puts a "but we're going to make it through" spin on
Right.
everything. And I feel like that book has kind of that vibe to it too.
I
Yeah,
follow there is something about this in storytelling, right? If you've ever looked at the analytics around Steve Jobs or best speeches ever made, the Steve Jobs speech, Martin Luther King, I Had a Dream speech, and the number of times you vacillate between, the future and today, and the future and today, and the future and today. And so, like, I don't know, I tend to kind of go back and forth. I mean, AI is transformative, it's going to change everything. And there's tremendous concern about that, but there's also tremendous reason for optimism if we are part of that conversation.
absolutely. Right. Yeah. And speaking of future, opening keynote is Future of AI. You,
Yeah.
Mallory, and Floyd Jones.
Yeah.
Uh, give us a teaser. What are we
The
gonna learn?
teaser. Yeah. I was just with Mallory in San Antonio yesterday and the day before. We were talking about this a little bit. And, it is, we talked about that balance, right? Because there's the balance of, like, the future, right, is, kind of scary and unknown. But at the same time, if we're not present in helping create that future, we know a certain side will be more pronounced than good. And so, for all to say is, like, AI is a mirror to society, and if our sector is not extremely present in building that future, we kind of can predict what the future of AI will look like. I mean, in all reality, the advent of generative AI was very, very, very slow and long coming, from 1955 up until November 30th, 2022, to the point where we had, like, this accessible, generative AI tool that it could actually do stuff for the average person. But since November 30th, 2022, the acceleration and kind of exponential nature has been, like, ridiculous. In fact, I love to marvel at this because, like, right now, like, I am deep and at Virtuous, we're obsessed with, like, agentic AI. So agentic AI, for those that have never heard that word or think I made that up, essentially it's the equivalent of AI agents, but it's essentially AI that takes complex tasks and takes autonomous decision making to a new level. Well, 2025, this is not future state. 2025 for private sector companies, all about AI agents and looking at like what are all the different roles within a nonprofit that can be highly supported or augmented by AI agents. And by the way, I managed nonprofits for 20 years. There's around 20 core job categories within an average nonprofit. And I spent lots of time in my no phone zone room kind of chronicling these and really started questioning like which of these could be supported. And turns out all of them, like 20 out of 20 jobs in the nonprofit can be highly supported by agentic AI. But Microsoft Word still thinks the word agentic is a typo, like in 2025. And Microsoft owns 50% of OpenAI. So like, right, this is hilarious. So all to say is that word did not exist 2 years ago. Products like Notebook LM were not even a thought of like, oh, you can take, a distillation of a PDF and turn it into a podcast. Like, so the acceleration is so fast. And, as we move into 2027, which is we consider to be probably by all accounts, and most people in AI believe that end of 2027 will be what we call the information explosion. So the future is just a lot of change. Like, I don't think anyone can predict in which direction it goes exactly, but we know for sure that the exponentials don't slow down, the pace continues, and that it means things that were impossible and not even conceived of 12 months ago are entirely plausible. And so I think today, if we think about the future of AI and the future of the nonprofit sector, living in a state of wonder and with an idea that anything is possible is the number one greatest human asset you could have.
I think that is so true. I think one of the reasons that wonder, and I'm just converting that to curiosity, is so important is that it has to resolve fear before you can get there, right?
Right.
So you have to do something, and fear and risk are related. And unless you can, and speaking of, agentic or agency, unless you get to a place where you can respond to risks that you see rather than reacting, you're not you're just in a reactive zone. You're not actually holding your own agency. And so, as I've been working on models around what has to happen in human psyche and behavior change in order to accept and get to that level, I feel like what you're talking about is so important to understand. And it is the bleeding edge.
Well, and I'm thinking about this a lot. Like over the last several years, I've had, so many organizations that deployed, custom machine learning algorithms, and about 50% succeeded and 50% failed. And those that succeeded versus those that failed had nothing to do with data or models, had to do with people and culture. And to exactly your point around fear is that you actually can't create a state of curiosity. I mean, you can, it'll be short-lived if you don't have a basis of truth. And so when we talk about like the future of AI, starting like when people are, where do I start? You start with AI governance, basically that says we either believe or don't believe in the use of AI that is aligned with the values of our organization. Not hard, but if you don't start there, you won't actually provide a framework for success. And it's really interesting. So I just reread this book. I've reread it a couple of times, but it took on new meaning this time. It's called The Four Agreements. I don't know if you've ever. It was like a required reading in college. It's been a best-selling book for 20 something years by Miguel Ruiz. It basically is like this idea that humans are created as inherently curious beings, and we experience the world as children in like full of wonder, but that societies and geographics and demographics and our communities shape us to either be more or less curious. And it's a book about happiness, which is, I've always read it as this book about happiness, but curiosity can't live if you don't know who you are, right? And if you've not created the space to be curious. And the same is for organizations. Like you have to create the safety, so the absence of fear, to create structure, and then basically either incentivize in whatever form that comes, incentivize is a culture of curiosity, so that your team can live in that state of wonder, like what's possible. So I think the future is really, really bright, but it's going to take almost a complete reversal of like the way we've led, the way we hire, the way we promote, the way we fire, and start rewarding questions more than answers, start providing people incentives to like try new things, and reward people when they do things that are hard or uncomfortable. That's not how business has been done very well. Like, I mean, I used to tell people, keep your eyes on your paper. I'd hire the subject matter expert, and then I'd tell them not to pay attention to anyone else, to keep your eyes on your paper, and then everything will be fine. And I think that's completely different.
It is. It's so interesting to hear what you're thinking about that. And I think that it's been a couple months since you and I have talked. And I've been, I think, as you know, for the last, 6 years, I've been working on tech governance models to support community development and culture, organizational culture around tech rather than tech, right? So human stack rather than tech stack.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about is so crucial in all of that. And this is kind of interesting. I'm not taking on the word governance directly because it's too important, just like adoption, right? There's problematic elements to it, but it's what we've got. But I do think that at the center of governance is a governor.
Right.
And what we really need going forward is a guide model. And so I've been developing digital guidance as a way to say the method of governance can't be governor. It has to be a guide embedded on teams. So there are multiple guides. So we create an outside in. And, I was putting that together in 2020. To see that at play in AI is so much more powerful now.
Yeah.
Because the limiting factor is a team's ability to adapt is going to be the limiting factor.
Entirely. Yeah.
Like everything else is just constant increased limit of exponential, right?
Yeah. I hated change management as a nonprofit leader. Like a consultant would come in and be like, can I help your team, whatever? And I'd be like, get out of here. Like, it's basically witchcraft. Like, you're just like, I'm going to pay you money. And like, literally you're going to help people get over the fact that we changed their screen from blue to green. Like, that's just stupid. And, I would tell you, people can change because I am like the biggest fan of change management at the personal level at this point. It's interesting because working through and thinking a lot about curiosity, it's your mind's hack of if you are willing to think of another alternative, you've now put your brain at ease to the fact that there's another reality.
Yep.
Right. And it's your own hack at a personal level. Be like, oh, wait, it's just because I've always done it this way doesn't mean it's the best or only way. And so I think we live in a constant state of that. The future for AI and philanthropy could be very bright.
And if we don't, I'm like so overjoyed to hear that's your impression now, because I've experienced that, for years, talking about not just change management, but about organizational development of tech as important. Like that is as important of an input as your ability to fundraise. And I think that it is now especially true. And I'm curious what you think about this. I feel like underneath all of that, the core reason for that is the difference between a related database as the basis of everything we know, which is all cloud services were built on, and a connected model of neural networks, which creates connection rather than relationship. I feel like that is such a massive shift that we need new models of almost everything in order to just keep up.
Well, I mean, it's a huge portion of like why I came to Virtuous even. I mean, because it's a different philosophy of like a system of record versus something that actually helps curate and make data actionable. And it's a very different philosophy, right? And, the manifest destiny for organizations in the future are essentially getting access to all the data because, the more and more, in 2017, I started really understanding the priority of data in making decisions in real time. The organizations that really thrive in the future are able to, in whatever form or fashion, be able to harness all of the ancillary data and then take action. And that's essentially what Virtuous has believed since day one. And I started following them like 7 years ago. I'm like, this is a very different model. And so, I'm super excited that Virtuous signed up as the co-presenting sponsor alongside Giving Tuesday this year because of that, because it is philosophically very, very different. Organizations have lots of data, and if it doesn't talk to itself or it doesn't talk to each other, then you're basically like managing silos all day long. And you're going to be so far behind, especially in how the private sector operates, and harnessing data in every channel to really understand constituents and take action. And so, it's, something to say is like, this is an inflection point. I mean, but this is truly an inflection point. I'm curious what you're seeing, in the world of like nonprofits on the adoption side. I see adoption very high. So as Mallory and I were talking, adoption is, in its loosest sense, very high, 80% adoption, but in a complete shadow way. Because if we start talking about AI strategy, right, let alone governance, just leave that aside because that's just not even happening. But like AI strategy, like I have a declared vision or path forward where I want to deploy AI to, say, scale impact or to achieve goals. I mean, we're talking like 5%, maybe 10% have had like very thoughtful, like in deliberate conversation, and then will stay on a path of doing that. So I say this is like, an inflection point, a pivot point, whatever, for our sector. I mean, I truly mean that, because the digital divide in a world where the private sector is like full bore, I can tell you, because Virtuous, that's all we're obsessed. Like all we talk about is basically human first, AI forward. That's it. Human first, AI forward. That's like everything that we talk about internally. How do we accelerate internally to like ideate faster, to bring new products faster, and all that through human first, AI forward. If our sector doesn't rise to this challenge in that same level of like, I don't know, energy and angst and all those other things, and we just keep on doing things the same way and expecting a different result, I mean, the future is not very bright. So, I do think we're at a really critical point where we have tools, accessibility and affordability of tools that can do anything, seemingly, that can absolutely amplify mission and scale impact. It's negligent if we just like turn our back to that.
I feel like you asked me what I see in terms of adoption. I see an attitudinal adoption shift from last year to this year, massive attitudinal shift with huge questions about what that means, and some really big blocks that made sense at the time they were made, like don't put donor data into an LLM, right?
Right.
Well, that's just way too bulky of a statement for fundraisers, right? So we need a shift to more specific outcomes, like utilize Google Workspace and Gemini, because you're not introducing new risk when you use your information inside of Workspace.
Right.
So those kinds of models, I think, that information is really critical. At a higher level, though, I think what you're talking about, I mean, first of all, it's so interesting. I essentially left Salesforce in my last company when I saw a slide that said 90% of organizations collect data, but only 5% use that data to make decisions. And I just felt like if I know that and I'm not actively figuring out how to move the needle on that, then, I didn't feel okay about the work at that point. So
right.
Yes, I feel like all of that is true. And the one thing I would say is who nonprofits follow, who nonprofit leaders follow, are places where I'm glad you're doing as much work as you're doing. I want to be doing as much work as I can. So places like National Council of Nonprofit, community foundations are really key and crucial at this point. And then philanthropy. And I'm spending a lot more time talking with philanthropy about being a guiding light in these, and actually being positive about moving the needle on this. So yeah, I think all of those are really crucial and important. The big cheat code, I feel like technology knows but can't convey to others, is that this is a opt-in to win technology. If you've got, with generative AI, if you've got staff that are using it, that's fine. And if you've got staff that aren't, they're lost. But, and that's so different than cloud services where you had dependencies on CRM, and if downstream didn't use it, then upstream users were, had bad information. I just feel like we're at a completely new level. And you can, I know, because I've watched you train, you can convert people in seconds in a way that you couldn't ever do before.
No, right. Because the barrier to master is so low, right? I mean, to like you can crawl, walk, run very, very quickly, and
Yep.
and it's more of an attitude shift. So if I think about, again, going back to just kind of projecting out a little bit, when we started Fundraising AI, most of the concern around AI, in fact, in 2017, when I really had the first concept, it was because we were building machine learning models with a tremendous amount of bias, potential for bias. And they actually had bias and potential. Like machine learning at the time was not very transparent. It was much harder to evaluate, where it's much actually predictive AI is so much easier to evaluate now than generative. And like, we would have never thought that. But, it went from the reasons to not adopt were around originally privacy and security. The second wave was ethics and bias. Now the third real big wave is the environment. And so, I think there's a point where I've started to try to train less, because I'm like, if you are at this point, just coming up with another new net excuse for why not to like try something new, because in all said and done, like the environment's a big issue. I'm writing an article about this because it's actually a very, very complicated issue. But in all reality, if you're like really concerned about it, and I'm doing a talk later today for environmental fundraisers, is that there are a lot of ways to offset your carbon footprint. But in all reality, like, I mean, how much, the biggest use of energy by far, the 800-pound gorilla, is streaming. Like by far. Like, I mean, you're going to shut down your TV? Like, how much TV do you watch, or how many, how much are you scrolling every day? And so all to say is, like, I feel like there's been waves of these like reasons why. And I read the study that 20% of people champion change, 50% of people sit on the sidelines, and 30% of people actively, this is not nonprofit sector, 30% of people actively resist change. Nonprofit sector, that 30% is probably higher. Like, let's be real. And at the end of the day, if you're just now not moving forward, it's on you, because you no longer really need to know how to write a better prompt. You need to like be willing to write the prompt. Like, you just like, there's no, you just like literally start and use your voice or whatever it might be at this point. And you had said like the attitudinal shift. Was it last year, in your opinion, like skepticism to like now inquiry, or like, so I kind of feel the same way.
I definitely feel like that. I also feel like it's moved from an acceptance of something you don't like. It really has moved to a curiosity level. The thing I do see over and over is the illusion of control around non-participation and benefit to the environment, right? That is illusion of control. That is a cognitive bias that does not real. And then on the other side, limiting beliefs, right? Oh, this can't help my job. I'm an expert at my job. Nobody knows more than me. And it's not like that. It's like, yeah, but you're not an expert at every part of it, right?
No, and you're not the best, right? I mean, this is the thing, is like, AI won't replace strategy, creativity, or empathy. That was always the thing. Be pre-GPT. That was like, it won't replace. But if you are the most creative person, you might have a chance. If you're the most empathetic person, you're the most strategic person, but let's be honest, like most of all of humanity is marginally good at all those things, or any of those things. I'm pretty good at a lot of different things, but like, I'm not the best at any one of those. And very few people are. And so like, that's the humbling part of all of this, right? I mean, I spent 20 years as a fundraiser, right? You probably know the story, but I spent 20 years as a fundraiser. When ChatGPT came out, November 2022, I just finished a course on philanthropic psychology through the Institute of Sustainable Philanthropy. And it was 8 modules. So like tons of reading and all this stuff and watching videos. I took every test, and this is crude, like ChatGPT 3.5, I guess. After I took every test, I fundraised 20 years, like pretty successfully. I exceeded the goal every single year. I took every single test in philanthropic psychology. I took the test, I scored myself. Then I pasted the test in ChatGPT, and guess what? It outperformed me in 8 out of 8 tests. So like, and I was a pretty good fundraiser that it exceeded goals every single year. So, I mean, at this point, like, we have to like recognize that there's something here, and we have to be willing to like allow that to happen, and find new and unique ways to use our humanness to essentially amplify mission, and not just through like routine work, but in like substantive experiences and opportunities.
I completely agree with that. And one of the global shifts we are going to have to deal with is that knowledge is not a differentiator anymore. Anyone can
Right.
know anything
Yeah.
with a deep research, you know, instantly or within 5 minutes. And so I think it elevates the power of context and the difference between
It totally
knowledge
does.
and understanding, right?
Yeah.
And
Have you seen the Adam Grant quote on that? It basically was like in the age of information scarcity, so anytime before November 30th, 2022, when GPT
right,
came out.
yep,
No, in the age of information scarcity, basically knowledge was rewarded. But in the age of information abundance, so now where information is either free or nearly free, it's no longer that information is no longer valuable. It's about connecting dots. And
yes,
so, truly, like, this is the opportunity for any person who's marginally good at a lot of things, as that curious generalist, to like connect dots. And this is like your time. Like, this is like you're going to be the hero of your organization.
it is so true. I feel like I did have this moment where I realized, oh my gosh, finally neurodivergents are going to win.
Oh
People like
yeah,
me with
no doubt.
ADD who are
Totally.
multi-passionate and follow 8 streams at once, like
Yeah.
I finally have a fighting chance in a way that I
Yeah.
never did. And I'm not like you. I'm not a fast, good writer. I'm a slow, decent writer. And this has been wildly transformative for me. I don't understand how we're out of time already, but we are. Um,
Always
I
the
would
case.
go, yeah, exactly. First of all, thank you to all of our sponsors, Virtuous and Giving Tuesday, especially for all the work that you are doing. I've stopped saying this is a free event and started saying this is an event where sponsors have paid for you to be there,
Yeah,
because
it's a
it is
very
not free, it's
expensive
not
event.
expensive. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so thank you to our sponsors, especially Virtuous, Giving Tuesday, and then all the others, and especially the Fundraising AI advisory team
Yeah.
that is working board of people that are working really hard, but also you, Mallory, Jen Lau. We just had Jen Lau on AI for Anyone live this morning.
Nice.
It's just, yeah, it's just such a massive amount of work. Really grateful for it. And thanks for your time
And
and all
and
of the
thank
work.
you. Yeah, Tim. I mean, you got above and beyond since the very beginning to like do things like this and like and help build community here, because I think we're all driven by something that's, fundraising AI is a passion project. And I mean, for people who don't know, it's open source. It's all like volunteer. We only have one paid person, and who is works her butt off to like make things happen. And we do this because we feel called to do it. We feel that the sector needs it and deserves it. And so thank you for all that you do, and just like raising your hand from day one. And then you could find a lot of other things to do with your time, like starting a smooth jazz station, but you've chosen to do this instead. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an honor. From the first time we talked, I've just really appreciated your work, your sense of humor, and your direction in life. So glad to partner up with you. It's been great, and I'll see you next week
See you
on the
next week.
15th and 16th. All
Yeah,
right.
can't wait. All right, thanks, Tim. Thanks for everything.
Yeah.